Hey everybody. Yesterday I was doing some basic, simple research and I came across a type of article that really kind of annoys me. I see these fairly often and they kind of remind me of what I think of as sort of evening news teaser headlines. The kind of headlines that say, you know, what's the latest thing that's going to kill your children? Tune in at 11 to find out. It's these scare tactic type headlines that are supposed to grab you and make you read this to find out, ooh, what do I not know about my aquarium that's going to kill me? What's the hidden silent killer that's in there that I need to know about? And so anytime you're doing research and you come across one of these articles that has some kind of title that seems like it would be a news article title version of clickbait, read it with a grain of salt, believe me. I read one yesterday and I had to go reread it again today to make sure I really wasn't misunderstanding what they were trying to tell me in this article. And there's not going to be a lot of point to going over and hashing out all of what it was talking about and everything, but you know what, I'm going to do it anyway because I'm going to get a certain sense of satisfaction from tearing this thing apart, because it really was just some bad information out there, and it's the kind of stuff that would scare the crap out of a beginner fish keeper that's not familiar with this kind of stuff. If you didn't already know about what they were talking about, which I kind of do, which is why I started scratching my head saying, what is this? What are they talking about? Anyway, what it is I was looking to find out whether or not pH affects our nitrogen cycle. I've been trying to rapidly cycle a tank. I've tried 3 times now. It's not working for some reason. That's a whole different video, a whole different subject. But the idea occurred to me that maybe my lower pH, I have a pH of around 6.4, maybe that's affecting the nitrogen cycle. Now, as it turns out, that tank actually is sitting at 7.6, so that wouldn't have been the problem anyway. But when I went to check about whether or not acidic water would affect the nitrogen cycle, which again, it doesn't in my experience, but I wanted to look for something, you know, I gotta start somewhere. So I come across this article that's all about aquaponics, and it talked about the ammonium trap, and they also referred to an ammonia bomb. Now, I was going to put ammonia bomb in my title here, but I didn't want to get demonetized for that, so I left that out of there. But you can imagine if you're reading something about the silent ammonium bomb in your aquarium or whatever, you're going to want to try to read this article and find out what it's talking about. So, what it's talking about is over time, the pH in our aquariums will lower. It doesn't lower because of the nitrate per se, but it does lower during the production of nitrate. As the ammonia is being converted into nitrite, some hydrogen ions are released. As the nitrite is being converted into nitrate, some more hydrogen ions are released. So you've got nitrate at the end, but that doesn't mean the nitrate is causing the pH drop. So when we see the nitrates coming up and we see the pH going down, there is a correlation there, but it's not necessarily because of the nitrate. So if you've got plants that are gobbling those nitrates up, your pH can still keep falling, but your nitrate level's not going to keep rising. So again, it's not the nitrate itself that is actually causing your pH to fall. It's the production of the nitrate that causes your pH to fall. So over time, even in a tank with a stable nitrate level, the pH will still lower if you don't have good buffering capacity. If you've got soft water or you've got very low carbonate hardness, your pH will fall over time. So in this scenario that they were talking about, they were saying that as your pH begins to fall, once, and I'm not 100% sure what they were saying here, but once you get below 7 and your water becomes acidic, the ammonia gets converted to ammonium, which is true. I know that to be the case. The ammonium is non-toxic, so it's harmless to the fish. Again, this is true. But they say that once it becomes ammonium, your nitrogen cycle, and again, they don't say this outright, that your nitrogen cycle doesn't process ammonium, but they strongly imply that your nitrogen cycle doesn't process ammonium, which it does. And so once you get into acidic water, now you've got this ammonium that begins building up in your aquarium. In their scenario, again, there's no truth to this, but they're saying that once you get acidic water and the ammonia gets converted to ammonium, it now begins building up in your water, and you get this build up and build up and build up of ammonium. So if you come along and you do a big water change and you bring your pH back up to 7, all of that free ammonium that was in the water is going to get converted back to ammonia, and boom, you're going to have this huge explosion of ammonia, hence your ammonia bomb, and all your fish are going to die because of all this ammonia that's in the water all of a sudden. Now, the scenario they gave, they actually painted out a, for instance, and they said, for instance, if your water pH were to drop to 3.5, how do these people know what they're talking about when they're talking about keeping fish? I mean, this wasn't Aquaponics website, but Aquaponics does involve keeping fish. And if they think fish can live in a pH of 3.5, I don't know what kind of fish they're keeping, but that's a really, really low pH. That's vinegar pH. So I did some research into that, and there actually are neon tetras, neon cardinals, and one other, or cardinal tetras, neon tetras, and one other type of tetra could actually withstand pHs that low. But those were the only fish they found, and the researchers were even really surprised that they were able to survive for a few weeks in pH that low. Most black water tanks, I mean the ones that look like they're made out of coffee, not tea, but the black water tanks, those have a pH of like 5. Or maybe 5.5 sometimes. And so having a pH of 3.5 is just a ridiculously low scenario. Nobody's ever going to have pH drift that takes them down to 3.5. So that was their scenario. You've got a pH of 3.5 in your aquarium because you haven't been paying attention to it for a while. You haven't done a water change in a while, and your pH has gone all the way down to 3.5. So if your ammonium were to build up to 20 parts per million while you were neglecting your tank, and then suddenly you came along and you did a 50% water change, you're only going to reduce that to 10 parts per million ammonium. But now in the process of that water change, if you brought your pH up to 7, those 10 parts per million ammonium are going to convert back to ammonia, and you're suddenly going to have 10 parts per million ammonia. Again, let's think about what it would take to do, if you had a pH of 3.5, that's 3.5 points below neutral. So to do a 50% water change and bring it up to neutral, you'd have to use water that's 3.5 points above neutral, 10.5. Milk of magnesia does not have 10.5 pH. Who has water that has a 10.5 pH? And if you've got water that has a 10.5 pH, it's got some rock solid buffering. It's not going to drift all the way down to 3.5. Again, these scenarios they paint in these articles that are trying to scare you into buying all their products and stuff are just absurd. How could this ever happen in the real world? How could you ever have an aquarium drift down to 3.5? Somehow have the nitrogen cycle not working. Now again, maybe at 3.5 the nitrogen cycle doesn't work. I don't know, because aquariums don't get that low. I have heard of people while they're cycling in their tanks, and I've thought long and hard about this today, so bear with me. I'm going to play this one out and see if this makes sense to anybody. I have heard of scenarios where if somebody's cycling a new tank artificially and they're adding ammonium chloride, and again, ammonium chloride is what we add to our tanks to cycle them, so ammonium is something our tanks can process. So if you're adding the ammonium chloride to a tank to get the cycle started, if you put too much in, if you've got like 10 or 15 parts per million, while that is being processed, again, it's the process of producing the nitrate that the hydrogen ions are being produced. So if you've got a huge amount of ammonia in the tank already, and it's being, it's rapidly producing these hydrogen ions, maybe then you would get this sudden drop in pH or something. If you had very soft water, you didn't have a lot of buffering capacity. Again, I'm trying to think of scenarios where you can have a pH crash that would stop your cycle from working. But I have heard of people cycling their aquariums where they have pH crashes and then the cycle stalls. It just sort of stops cycling while the pH is really low. I've never experienced this, and I've never had anybody give me any details about how low the pH fell, how fast it fell. I don't know, but I have pH of 6.4 in a lot of my tanks. I've checked. I have no ammonia, no ammonium. None of that stuff builds up in any of my aquariums. For all my experiences with people that have had black water tanks, they don't have ammonia or ammonium building up in their water. So even at a low pH of 5 in a black water tank, the ammonia, or ammonium in this case, would still be being dealt with in some fashion. This article I read started out, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but it started out by saying that the reason that the nitrogen cycle is so important is because plants can't absorb ammonia. And you have to break the ammonia down into nitrate for the plant to be able to use it. That's completely wrong. Plants readily absorb ammonia. In fact, they absorb ammonia before they'll absorb the nitrate. A plant has to do more work to nitrate in order to process it for its own purposes than it does ammonia. Ammonia is just like the raw building material. Plants love getting ammonia. And this article is basically predicated on the idea that plants can't process ammonia. It's also predicated on the idea that, you know, a nitrogen cycle doesn't deal with ammonium. So the only way I could see this really actually ever being any kind of problem, and I did think of one real world scenario, so if you're still with me, thank you. And here is a real world scenario where this ammonium thing could play a factor. It's similar to what they laid out, it's just more realistic parameters. So let's say you got an aquarium that's got a 6.5 pH and you have a big fish die. And suddenly you get this big ammonia spike that you don't notice for a few days. Suddenly you smell the dead fish and you go in there, and because you've got this acidic water, this big ammonia spike's not harming anybody because it's ammonium, but you're close enough to a neutral situation where if you do a nice big water change after this, you've discovered this dead fish, you take it out, you do a water change, then you might actually shift the pH above 7 a little bit. And if you didn't do a big enough water change, and there really was, you know, 8 parts per million ammonia and ammonium in there, and you did a 50% water change, you're still leaving behind 4 parts per million. And so if you did push it from 6.5 to 7.2 or something, you know, you got it up into that above neutral. Now suddenly that 4 parts per million ammonium that was in the tank would convert into ammonia. But again, as long as you've got a functioning nitrogen cycle, it wouldn't take long at all for that ammonia to be dealt with and so on and so forth. But, you know, so there are real world scenarios where what they were sort of trying to address in a very weird sort of way could kind of almost play out. But again, these are the kind of things that are just sort of designed to scare you into checking this and testing that and buying different stuff. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for testing your water. I promote testing your water all the time, but do it when you need to and do it for the right reasons and do it when necessary. You don't need to test your water 6 times a day, and you don't need to be in this constant panic about some unseen killer in your tank that's going to suddenly happen and all this stuff. And especially if your tanks have been up and running for a long time and everything's going fine and you know, don't panic if that's the case. If you do need to make some adjustments, do them slowly and over a longer period of time. Don't ever panic and suddenly start making huge changes to your aquariums. That's where you run into trouble. So a lot of talking, not really a whole lot of anything there, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Again, if I got something wrong, if you know something I don't and I'm missing something here, by all means let me know. I'll be happy to shoot another video and explain how wrong I was about all this stuff. But to my knowledge, that article was just bonkers. I mean, it was ridiculous. I'm not even going to tell you about it, the name of it or whatever, but it was a big like aquaponics, aquaculture brand distributor website that had all kinds of information and you know, tips and how to and products you can buy and services they offer, and yet that's the kind of information I found on their website. So anyway, that's my 2 cents for tonight. Hope you enjoyed all that rambling rant. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. You never know what you're going to get with me. See you real soon on the next one.